was gonna call this Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman, but then I thought, no, that's too on the nose. So instead, we went with Ted Bundy, The Price of Perfection. Ted Bundy was undeniably good-looking, charming, and charismatic, qualities that helped him to become one of America's most notorious serial killers. But what made him the way he was? What was the price of perfection? Let's find out. Hello and welcome to another episode. This is the series where I cover criminally underreported or underrepresented crimes and criminals in the hopes that their stories will be the first step in bringing them the justice they deserve. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, to a single mother named Eleanor Louise. She was only 18 years old when Ted was born and had to raise him alone because his biological father, Jack Andrew Cunliffe, abandoned her shortly after she became pregnant with Ted. Eleanor worked as a dental assistant while her mother looked after Ted. She did everything she could to make sure Ted grew up feeling loved and secure. And despite not being around for all of Ted's milestones, she would later say she never felt like a bad mother and that she knew Ted loved her. When Ted was 4, Eleanor married a man named William Bundy, who adopted Ted and brought him to live with him and Eleanor in Philadelphia. By all accounts, William was a great father to Ted. He would take him on fishing trips, taught him how to ski, and took him hunting. It seems as though Ted was very much a daddy's boy and really looked up to his stepfather. At age 7, Ted asked his mother if he could kill an animal and eat it. When William told him that killing animals was wrong, Ted replied, "But Dad, you do it all the time." That was the last time William ever took Ted hunting. In junior high school, Ted fell in love with a girl named Elizabeth Cloak and asked her to marry him. She said yes. However, before they could get married, William sent Ted to live with his grandparents so that Ted could finish high school. It was at this time that Ted began having problems with the law. He was caught stealing and breaking into cars, and at one point was even arrested for attempting to burglarize a home. All of these events were kept under wraps by his grandfather, who had connections with police officers and judges, and seemed to be able to keep Ted out of jail. In 1961, at age 14, Ted was sent back to live with his parents. A year later, he dropped out of high school and joined the Army. While in the Army, Ted met a girl named Carol Ann Boone. They married and had a son together. But Ted's behavior continued to be problematic, and he was soon kicked out of the military. After his discharge from the Army, Ted enrolled at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, studying psychology. During his time here, he would often skip classes and instead hang out at the local coffee shop, talking about politics and philosophy. Ted graduated in 1969 and began working as a Seattle Crime Prevention Association's volunteer, which allowed him to have access to criminal files and information that would later help him to evade the police. In December of 1961, Ted called his wife and said he was going out for milk and never came home. In January of 1974, a woman reported seeing a man fitting Ted's description carrying a surfboard into his apartment. No one saw him come out of the building again for several weeks. On February, Ted called his father, saying he hadn't been himself lately, and that he needed to go away for a while. Then he disappeared. On January 4, 1974, the body of a young woman was found on the side of a road near Lake Sammamish. Her name was Linda Ann Healy. Several days earlier, another woman was found dead, not far from where Linda was. Her name was Susan Elaine Roncourt, and she had been dating Ted Bundy. Neither woman's death was initially investigated as a homicide. It was until 3 more women were found dead in the same general area that the FBI stepped in. 2 of the victims were confirmed to be Ted Bundy's girlfriend, but the 3rd victim was someone named Donna Manson. She was a young mother who had been in the process of getting a divorce. At the time, Ted was considered a person of interest in the case, but there was no concrete evidence to link him to the murders, so he was allowed to go free. After hearing that Ted had gone camping over the Christmas holiday, police traveled to the campsite to question him. Ted agreed to speak with the police and even voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test, which he passed. The police didn't find anything connecting Ted to the crime scene and let him go. Meanwhile, Ted continued his life as normal. He married his second wife, a woman named Elizabeth Kleck, and got a job working as a night dispatcher for the Seattle Crime Prevention Association. His colleagues described him as a hard worker who rarely took any vacation time and used every waking moment to work. He never mentioned his wife, and reportedly never once smiled while at work. During this time, Ted was living with his fiancée, and on December 30th, 1974, she noticed that Ted had fresh scratches on his arms, chest and neck, as well as dirt under his fingernails. When she asked him about the injuries, he claimed he had gotten them while fixing a muffler on a car. That explanation didn't satisfy her, and she broke off their engagement. According to her, Ted responded by saying, "You don't know me at all. You don't know what I'm capable of." She should have listened to him. A few months later, on May 1975, the body of a 18-year-old girl named Karen Sparks was found on the side of a road. She had been reported missing just 2 weeks prior after leaving behind her purse, shoes, and car at a library and never coming home. Police searched for Karen and discovered that Ted Bundy had been seen with her and matched the description of the man who had been seen with other missing girls. They also discovered that Ted had been living in the same apartment complex as Karen, and that he had called her home several times while she was missing. Because of all this evidence, the police placed Ted under surveillance and followed him to Colorado. There they searched his room, finding a hidden key used to open a storage locker. Inside the locker, they found handcuffs, a crowbar, rope, several pairs of women's shoes and clothing, along with books on forensics and criminal psychology. They also found photographs of the murdered women. Finally, they had enough evidence to arrest Ted. He was charged with the murder of Karen Sparks and extradited back to Washington. In July, Ted stood trial for the murder of Karen Sparks. He acted as his own attorney and told the jury that he was innocent. The jury took less than an hour to reach a verdict. They found him guilty. Ted was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. While in prison, Ted began acting erratically. He refused to speak to anyone, including his own attorneys. He also refused to cooperate in appeals regarding his conviction. And even though he had always protested his innocence, he began sending letters to his former wife, admitting that he had killed both Karen Sparks and Donna Manson. In 1977, Ted escaped from prison and spent time with his family in Florida before turning himself back into authorities. He was returned to Washington State, but was soon transferred to a Colorado prison. In 1978, Ted escaped again and fled to Chicago, where he turned on the news and watched himself being hunted on America's Most Wanted. He stayed in Chicago for several weeks before returning to Colorado. It was here that Ted was finally caught and returned to prison. Ted was given 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders in Colorado and 5 additional life sentences for the murders in Washington. He was moved to a Florida prison and in 1989 confessed to a total of 30 murders. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed by electric chair at the age of 42. If you like this kind of content, check out my page. I've got true crime documentaries and series there, as well as on another platform. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.